The following episode of FOFOP is classified MA. It contains some coarse language, some nudity, drug references, a sex scene, time travel, terrible Batman impersonations, a Charlie Clausen, pronounced Clausen-shaped hole, and mild coarse language. FOFOP advises that the program is not suitable for persons under the age of 15, and minors must be accompanied by an adult guardian or priest. This is John Deek speaking.
Hello and welcome to FOFOP. I'm Wil Anderson, and joining me, first-time guest Charlie Clausen. Now, here's the thing, though. I have never before, I've saved this until we started doing the podcast, but I have never before had more requests for somebody to be a guest Charlie on this show than our guest today. It is guest Charlie, Bert Kreischer. How are you, mate?
I'm fantastic. For real.
For real. Like, I mean, I think maybe like a lot of people who listen to this podcast must listen to your podcast, and so it feels to me that's where it comes from. Like, often what I get is a combination of either you should have Bert on your podcast or you should go on Bert's podcast. So I
would love to have you on my podcast.
Well, I mean, apparently there's at least 4 or 5 people who would also love that. So. So it's nice to have you here, my friend.
I think I made my career from podcasting. Like, I think my podcasting helped my career exponentially. Better than TV. Like, I'm not even doing TV anymore, just doing my podcast, and my career's never been better.
Why do you think that is? Because I love podcasting. I've been doing it for a long time. I have like 4 of them. Like, it's, you know, as I like to say, I have an entire imaginary radio station, and people often ask why, you know, like all the time you have to put into it, all the effort you have to put into it. What is it about the podcast that what do you like about it? But B, what do you think the audience like about it?
I'll tell you what I like about I just driving over here just said this is what I love about podcasting. Pauly Shore was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he said he's very sad that he doesn't have a film career anymore. And he was very open and honest about being on Adam Sandler's set for his movie and how he wanted to be the star, how he wanted. Like, it was, and I go, that's vulnerable. Like, that's vulnerability. That's honesty. You'd never see Pauly Shore talk like that on stage. Never. So as a fan of someone's, or not even as a fan, when you see someone share vulnerability or honesty or just candor, like, it's like I liked Ricky Gervais, but man, when I heard his podcast, I loved Ricky Gervais, and I think that I'm that way. Like, my stand-up's good, but I think when you hear me on a podcast, you go, oh, that's a little bit of what he does on stage with a whole lot of other real stuff that strangers would never sit through.
Well, yeah, but the other thing is that, I mean, look, there's such beauty in the complexity of things because, like, you know, sometimes even, like, maybe there'll be something from this podcast that ends up on stage.
Oh, that my entire act is based off of things I said on a podcast that people lost it, and I can't even tell you, the people that listen to podcasts are the coolest fans ever. When I went and did Rogan probably 5 years ago, and I told the machine story, Rogan said, you need to tell the machine story every time you go on stage. And he goes, you guys listening, force him to tell that story. Shout out the machine until he tells it. Because, Bert, this will change your career. He's like, if you just keep telling it, it'll get good. So the next week I was in Columbus. This guy's sitting in the front row, and they're chanting the machine. And I'm going, guys, I don't tell it on stage. At the time, quite honestly, I was a derivative, hacky comic. In all honesty, I was doing material that was, some of it was good. Like, you'd find some nuggets. But for the most part, I think it was a lot of this fun boy party comedy, like Dane Cook, Nick Swartz, and nothing against either of their acts. But, like, you know, interchangeable Steve Byrne, Brett Ernst, not Sebastian, but probably Sebastian at the time. And
right. There's guys that I would put in a category. Well, perhaps some of those guys transcend this category. And I don't mean this in an offensive way.
I don't mean it offensive at all.
But the sort of guys that if you went to a comedy night and they're on, they're going to crush.
Yeah.
Whatever the night is, they will crush.
For me, it was more about crushing.
Yeah.
Like, I was young, and I just thought, I want to crush. I was like 37, 36 maybe. And I go up, and they're chanting the machine, and I knew there's a 12-minute story that once I start, I have to commit to. I'm not going to do it. I go, guys, it's not a stage story. This guy's a podcast fan in the front row. And he goes, hey, Bert, listen, we know it's not going to be good, but you need to do this. And I'm like, what fucking fan do you... I'm like, I literally was like, dude, can I find 500 of you and have you everywhere? And now when I work a story, and now I feel like all I do is tell stories, but when I work a story, I hear that guy in my head going, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good. But if you want to be a better comic, you need to keep doing it as it sucks. The story I have right now that's killing is a ziplining story with my family. The first time I did it, it bombed. But I knew, I was like, if I just keep doing it, it will get good. And now it is crushing. And I go, and I just hear that in my head. But by the way, I would have never done that if it wasn't for podcasting.
Yeah, so that's the thing that's interesting to me. So this world of podcasting, how it actually affects your stand-up in reverse. Because this journalist who was asking me these questions about podcasting, one of the questions they asked me, and asking me a whole bunch of things that I don't really engage with or think about that often, so it just kind of made me start to have to think about them. And he was kind of looking at it from the perspective of how has it affected your stand-up in regard to people coming to see your stand-up, which it certainly has. Like, you know, there are people who come out from the podcast. But what I really was like, no, it's affected my stand-up because it's reminded me, like the things that people have responded to on this podcast have been moments of complexity or moments where you've taken like 12 minutes to tell a story, because sometimes if you tell it in 3 minutes, you're going to get a black and white one angle on what the story was about. But if you tell it in 12, you get to have the journey of here's where I was wrong, here's where they were wrong, here's where this thing happened, here's where I learned this. You can,
and you're telling it to another comedian often, and they ask the question that an audience would have asked.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. Feel free to interrupt. It's fine. It's fine. If we're going to not interrupt each other, I don't think this is...
can you just be in a fight with my wife then? She goes, don't interrupt me. I go, that's how a conversation works. You say something, then I say something, and sometimes you say something that makes me think of something, and I say it. Oh, my God. I think podcasting is the one thing I say when it goes, how does it affect people coming to your shows? The number one thing I get said that people say to me at a show, not number one thing, but like number one thing is, will you do a shot with me? But the one of the ones that I like the best is, hey man, thank you for all the free content. And it's just, it's one of the things, like some guys that start podcasts and they make it like a billing service and you got to sign up and pay monthly. I go, I think you're missing the point. John Ronson, who wrote a book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and he's doing something for Audible. I like Audible, but it's not in my 3-point shooting circumference with my thumb. Like I can real quick go, what am I going to listen to on this ride? And just swipe over, hit podcast, go to the podcast app and go, who we got? And I went, oh, Pauly Shore, that's cool. And then Pauly says, oh, I did Joey Diaz's and I got so high I couldn't finish it. I'm like, okay, I'll be listening to that on the ride home. So like, I don't know, man. I love them. I always say, I had a meeting with my agency, and they're like, we have a new podcast guy. I know you have a podcast rep, but like we'd be interested if you'd just at least take the call and see if you'd be interested in leaving. So I was like, sure. And I talked to the guy, and I said, hey, man, just so you know, you're talking to a guy who's really into podcasts. So like I hope that you have more information than me. And he was like, oh, I know what I'm doing. And then halfway through, he's like, I clearly I don't, man. I'm sorry.
Right.
I didn't know you were I'm a legit podcast fan.
Yeah.
Like that's what I listen to.
So what were the podcasts that you were listening to before you started podcasting?
Oh, Ricky Gervais, Joe Rogan, Mark Maron. Mark Maron's, but Mark Maron, when he puts, I loved when he did comics. I'm not a big fan of the band guys.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I don't like filmmakers.
I don't get these stars off this fucking podcast and get some comics on.
Just get comics.
Just find a whole... Mark, you're back playing the clubs. I'm sure you're having awkward interactions with other comedians again now.
All the time.
Just get them on your podcast and sort out those awkward interactions so that we can listen to them.
You can have people back, Mark. Like, I have Doug Stanhope back. Like, it's been 6 years since you had him on.
Right.
Like,
and also, you know what? It was nice that you had the president on, but maybe you'd have a beef with the president and then get him back on so that you guys have to sort out where you had your beef.
But and Mark's still, like, I listened to the one he did the other day. Sometimes he has an actor on that surprises me and I go, oh, this guy's pretty deep. This is like, he had Jason Bateman on. That was fucking amazing. It was amazing. But Maron's, Rogan's, Ricky Gervais, I was obsessed with This American Life. And those were probably my quick go-tos, and then anyone, like, that was at the time when if someone got started a podcast, I get into it. Now,
they were the good old days. That's because that's often these days when somebody asks you about the podcast. They're like, what's your podcast about? And I was like, oh, no. We're from a time where it was enough that you had a podcast. It didn't need to be about something. For a while, it was just like, there's a new one. We'll listen to that one as well, I guess, because we ran out of the other 5 podcasts.
There was a moment where they were just trying to get any MMA fighter and a comedian to get in a room together. I wanted to do a show with. There's this guy Jason Mayhem Miller. He is notorious like on the edge of sanity. Okay. And he did this really long Real Sports interview on Real Sports on HBO that was bizarre. And I wanted to do a podcast with him and just go, because he's an intense guy. Go, hey man, you don't even have to leave your house. All I need you to do is I'm gonna record an intro, and then I'll send it to you. You listen to it, and then just comment and just blow up, and then I'll pretend we shot it together, and then you walk out of the room, and I'll just go, well, he's gone, and we'll do it. And so, but I never did it. I've had a million great ideas for podcasts that I've wanted to do. I wanted to do. One of them was Steve Renazizi's. We thought of it on my podcast. It's called Hear Me That Book, where he doesn't read the book, and someone who has comes in and just tells him about a book. I've wanted to do a bunch, but just
give me what I need to know.
Yeah.
I don't need to know it all. Just run me through it. Give me the general vibe. So Harry Potter's like the wizard, right? Is he a wizard? Did he live in a cupboard? Just tell me the shit I need to know.
Dude,
What's a Gryffindor?
I tried desperately. I used to work for a network called Travel Channel for like 7 years. For 7 years, I kept trying to get them. They are owned by Scripps, which owns cooking, food, travel, DIY, HGTV, all the home improvement ones. I tried forever to get them to start a podcast network. I was like, you have no idea what you guys have, all the stars in the home category. Just start a podcast.
The absolute things that people, and you can see it now with the big sort of Podcast One and those sort of big, kind of commercial radio apps. They're going after those people. They're getting those celebrity chefs. They're getting those sort of celebrity, DIY people, and they've all.
Do you know who Bobby Flay is?
Yes, I'm a big cooking show fan, like a really big cooking show fan, and I'm also like my favorite, just for the record, because is Tom Colicchio from Top Chef. Do you ever watch Top Chef? No. I love that show, but also I love him. But also he just deals out sweet burns on people on Twitter around politics, and it's like I'm really into it. I've become quite a big fan of his Twitter feed because he is not happy with what's happening in America and he puts it in a really fun way. And then when people get mad because he's the guy from Top Chef, he burns them in a way that he would kick someone out of Top Chef for burning food. It is the best. I love it.
I got to check him out.
Yeah, Bobby Flay. So
Bobby
back
Flay,
to Bobby.
Bobby Flay wanted and I are partying in in Dallas one night, and he's like, we're doing an event. He's like, hey, I'm in LA tomorrow. I know you're in LA. And he's like, I'm really interested in podcasts. Do you mind if I could come on your podcast? I want to see what it's about. And I was like, sure. He was under the impression that we would be in some big studio with air conditioning. He came to my house. I was in gym shorts, no shirt. And I was like, and he was in a suit with a driver. And he had and he was like, where do we do it here? I said, we do it in my man cave. We went back in my man cave, and he was like, and all I have is my H6 and my 2 mics. And he's like, where's everyone else? And I go, this is it, Bobby. And he was like, are you kidding me? He was like, I can do this. I go, no shit. That's why, I always hear when you hear celebrities go, I won't say the celebrity's name, but I ran into him the other day, and I was like, hey, I want to have you on my podcast. He's like, well, can I do it right when my podcast comes out? Because I'm about to start a podcast. I said, sure. When's that? And he goes, well, we're almost done signing the deal. So as soon as the deal's closed, I'm gonna start. And I go, deal with who? And he was like, I got to get, it's a big deal to start a podcast. And I went, you just go to Sam Cooke or Goody Music and just get a recorder and 2 mics, and that's it. And he was like, oh no, I got to get my producers on board.
You don't need producers.
I was like, you don't.
Eventually, it'd be good to have one. Don't get me wrong.
It would be nice for someone to keep track of my SD cards. That would be nice.
Yeah, exactly. Don't get me wrong. We now have a producer. His name's Michael. He lives in Oregon. Yeah. And because Charlie and I often record our shows from different countries, so we just record them. We both just have a separate. This is how easy it is. 2 dumb guys like us who know how to do nothing. Yeah. Right. live in a world where us dumb guys can plug in one of these at each end, get on Skype, do the podcast, and then we just send it to a guy who's doesn't even live in the same country as us, and he just puts it together, and then it's out. That's how you do a podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then my wife said, my wife's starting one. My wife wants, because I have the whole man cave set up, she goes, I think I'd really enjoy this. We redid our house.
Okay.
She said, I have a purpose in life redoing this house. We got done redoing the house. She goes, I have no purpose. I said, start a podcast. She's like, with who? I go, with your friends. Just, who gives a fuck? Just do it. And she goes, what if it stinks? I go, it will. It will for maybe forever.
Maybe.
Yeah, or maybe it'll get good and maybe you'll really enjoy it. Maybe you'll stumble onto something that you love.
But also the other thing is, and this is, this is only from a consumer's perspective now, because I'm like you. I'm a massive podcast fan.
Yes.
And my favorite, the way that I feel about certain podcasts is not based on them being the biggest podcasts in the world. My favorite podcasts aren't the Game of Thrones of podcasts or the whatever. They're these things that I like. I mean, there's this podcast I mentioned all the time on this podcast, but it's one of the original podcasts. They've been around forever. They're amazing. It's called Oh Yeah Dude. America Through the Eyes of Two American Americans. Just it's brilliant. And they've been doing it forever. They've done 500 episodes of it. And it would never, ever be, in the top 10 fucking podcasts on the podcast charts or anything. But if they stopped...
Well, I'm trying to grab my phone to look at my podcast now. Here, keep going.
But so it's one of those things where you're just like, they have, regardless of, if they're ever going to be, seen on a list with, the biggest podcasts in the world or whatever, the president isn't going to do their podcast. But to me, it's been my favorite podcast for a decade.
Yeah.
They have brought joy to my life consistently in a way that they amuse me, more than anybody else that I listen to. It's literally the one podcast that I loved Kevin Smith's Smodcast when I first started, but then I just eventually kind of stopped listening. And, this is the one that I have stuck with. And I hope that they know that there are people out there, and there'd be people who feel that about your podcast, and I know there's people who feel it about our podcast, where for them, it's brought them some specific joy that you're like, oh, I got to make something at my kitchen table, right? I plugged in some things, and somebody thinks it's the best thing. It's their favorite thing.
It's what's getting them through. There was a guy who goes, I did a 5-hour podcast with these two guys, Danish and O'Neill, and all we did was just get fucking obliterated. And this guy, I was in Cleveland, and this guy comes up, and he's like, dude, more 5-hour podcasts. I go, dude, that takes a lot out of me. And he's like, no, I drive a forklift, and you have no idea.
Right.
I started you in the morning, and then I knew, I get to go to lunch and come back and listen to Bert.
Right.
And I was like, oh, yeah. I find that one of my favorite podcasts I've ever listened to in my entire life. Do you know who Brody Stevens is?
Yeah, of course.
Brody, this is probably 6 years ago.
For the people at home, though, we probably should do we need context for the sake of the story? Because Brody's a certain, he's a very distinct individual.
He's a very, I've known Brody for 18 years. Brody was good friends with Zach Galifianakis. He did a show in the States called Enjoy It, where it kind of chronicled him having a nervous breakdown. Brody had a nervous breakdown. Brody's stand-up is very unique. It's very self-referential, and it's very, he takes pride in stuff no one would take pride in, like his area code. He's like 818 till I die, and that's no one wants to claim 818. Right. But Brody, I'm from Tarzana. I know the bus routes. It's really a really bizarre style of stand-up. Right. And by the way, sometimes some people could argue no punchlines, but very funny.
Well, it's one of those things too where he's very much in the vein of a comedian that if people on the night get onto what he's doing, it's going to be a really special experience. Oh. He's also the sort of comedian, by the nature of what he does, that if people don't get on board, it can... for a comedian to watch it, it can still be very, very fascinating.
I've never not enjoyed a Brody Stevens set.
Yeah, but...
Yeah. I was a pitcher in college. I have back hair. It's just, still call my mom mommy. He's just a really interesting guy. So he did a podcast. With when Brian Redman ran Death Squad. Death Squad was the label that Rogan was under. And then Brian set up Death Squad and started making podcasts for everybody. He did one with Brody and his roommate, Johnny Spanish. And I swear to God, Will, they don't even, it's a 2-hour podcast. and they don't even get the intro out.
Right.
Because it's all about the intro that Brody believes Johnny Spanish is fucking up. And it is 2 hours of them trying to figure out the intro to a podcast. And I'm on a treadmill, howling, laughing, going like, because it is, once again, it's not Brody on stage. It's a side of Brody you don't often get to see.
Right.
And it was so authentic that you were like, and he's like, and one of my favorite things on podcasts is when people get off mic like that, and you can hear Brody going, "God damn it, Johnny Spanish, you can't mess up the end." And it is just genius. Like, oh, those, like, I always like the nuances. Like, I like the one thing I do with my podcast is I just start recording. And then someone's like, have we started? And I go, oh, yeah, that's because some radio guy did it to me one time on an interview. I did call in, and he just started talking to me, and we were just bullshitting. And I was like, hey, are we going to start it? And he goes, I've already started, man. And I was like, oh, this is a really good conversation, too. Like, we were just talking. I wasn't like Bert on radio.
Right.
But, yeah, I could talk about podcasting all day long.
Well, I mean, that's okay. That's good. I mean, I like, the other thing I like about, obviously as this world grows and it's expanding now, we're in a point of transition, I think, in the podcast industry where, major players are recognizing that podcasting is a thing now and it's a legitimate thing. Advertisers are coming to the art form. Like you said, big celebrities are going, oh, I'm going to have my own podcast now, right? So it's not like what it was, a while ago where, the few of us who had podcasts, like the joke is now every comedian has a podcast.
Yeah.
There was a period of time where it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
So I don't mind the idea that occasionally we stop down and we actually have a chat about the thing that we're doing.
Well, because I think the people listening to it love podcasts also. And they don't like I can't listen to someone's podcast. Like Katie Couric has a podcast. She's from the Today Show here. And it was so bad that I said, whatever made you think you could be a broadcaster?
Right.
Ever? Why are you even in television? Like, it was so monumentally bad that I literally was like, I might hate listen to this and just comment. But yeah, I like My Favorite Murders. I like that one. That's a really good podcast.
Yeah.
We're going to be in Australia.
Yeah. So we should actually, let's mention that because we'll plug it as we go along. But you are touring Australia. You're coming out for Just for Laughs.
Yeah.
And we're doing a couple of live FOFOP shows there at Just for Laughs as well. Big comedy festival they have, obviously, in Sydney, around the Sydney Opera House.
Yeah.
And it's a week of fantastic shows. Joel McHale, who was a guest Charlie on the show last week, he's doing some shows down there as well. But you're touring all around Australia. And
because they offered me the festival, and I was like, oh, dude, if I'm going down there, I'm hitting. Like, one of the things I love about this country, and I'm sure you can probably back me up, is like, you go to a place like Vermont or Omaha or Des Moines, and people always go, hey, man, thanks for coming to Des Moines.
Right.
Like, they're like, why did you come to Des Moines? You're like, because you're here. Like, this is what I do, and I need people to watch it, and you happen to live here, and you want to watch it. That's how we connected.
Right.
Like, you're no different to me than San Francisco. Like, there's no difference between San Francisco and Des Moines. Your money is exactly the same as theirs. And so when I got the offer, I was like, I'm going to Perth. And they're like, everyone's like, no, you're not. You have no idea. It's in the middle of nowhere. Don't go to Perth. I go, no, I'm going to Perth. I go, I want to go everywhere. I want to go to Adelaide. I want to go to Brisbane. And everyone was like, no, you're overscheduling yourself. Just do Sydney and Melbourne. That's all you got to do. Or Melbourne, how you ever say it.
Yeah, I mean, like, you weren't too bad the first time. You were right the second time.
Yeah.
but you weren't, like, it wasn't offensive the first time.
Yeah. So I booked, I didn't book Adelaide, oddly enough, but I booked Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, and Melbourne. And Perth's the one that sold the quickest. And I've got more tweets from people going, dude, thank you for coming to Perth. And I was like, of course, it's just as far as Australia is from here for me. It just happens to be another flight. So
I always used to say to people, like, when I started nationally touring, early on in my career in Australia, you do press in person. They would be a bit like, even the press would be like, good on you for coming. And I would always say to them, I say, this is a pleasure because people give a shit that you came here. So the shows are always great because the audience come along with a bit of like, thank you very much for being here. Whereas you do a show in Sydney or Melbourne, like,
Of course he's coming here.
Yeah, of course he's coming here. This is where you come. I'm going to go and see Bruce Springsteen tomorrow. This isn't even the highlight of my week. In fact, it might not even be the highlight of my night. I'm going to go and eat in some restaurant by some chef who's in the top 10 chefs in the world.
It might not even be the highlight of my night. I mean, this is Sydney, for Christ's sake.
Right, exactly.
I've been to Australia one other time. I had a fucking blast. I love that place.
What was the previous time that you came down?
I went down to do a TV show. And I was turning 40.
What was the TV show that you went down?
Trip Flip. We take two people on adventures of a lifetime.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so was one of their adventures to go to Australia on an adventure?
Two couples.
Oh, they both?
Yeah. Well, we did 2 episodes. We did one in Cairns.
Okay. Yeah.
And then one in Sydney.
Okay.
And so we took a couple. This was the flaw of the show also, is that I didn't technically know anything about these people. I just looked at them for a second, made a snap judgment, and said, think you're going to be amazing. And we wrongfully picked a guy with severe rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh, no.
He couldn't do anything. He couldn't, we did this.
That'd be like picking me. Like, I can't even sit down to do this podcast.
He couldn't kneel. He couldn't squat.
Right.
He couldn't even bend. So we did this thing with this Aborigine guy, and he wanted us to sit down and sit in a circle. And
have a respectful ceremony of some kind, I imagine.
And the guy just kind of squatted like a coach listening to his catcher. Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible. And then we took him mountaineering, and he couldn't do any of that thing. And then the cold locked his joints up, so he froze. And so we had to lower his body off a waterfall. And he's drowning because the waterfall's on him. And then we just dropped it. It was horrible. Dude, we did so many bad things like that because you didn't know anything. You just go, you guys look great, let's go. And then they'd be like, awesome. And then we took met a interracial couple.
So when you said you just pick them and say, let's go.
Yeah.
From where? Where are you?
Just on the street.
So this was a TV show where you would just go up and find 2 people on the street.
I go, hey, are you guys adventurous? And they're like, yeah. I go, as you got more into the show, you learned you had to be more specific with questions.
Right. Yeah.
I'd have to say to black people, can you swim?
Right.
Because it's just stereotypes there for a reason, but in America, not as much anymore, but there was a period where black people didn't swim a lot, and it still runs through the community where you will find black people who don't know how to swim.
Right. And the truth of and this is what I like about podcasts, just this moment, right? Because if we were on stand up, or we could just brush over this moment right now. But that was just you kind of trying to dance around saying something in a way that you were like, you started saying something and then you were like, is this kind of an offensive thing to say? And then you were like, well, no, probably in your head the reason is that black people couldn't swim. It wasn't like black people weren't trying to swim. It was because the swimming programs were not in schools where black communities and things like that.
It was because of segregation.
Right.
They weren't allowed in pools.
In the public pools,
and
right?
they weren't allowed on public beaches. So
and this is the point. Normally when it's something like that, it's as a result of a group in society not being given access to that thing. And so the fact that you have to ask isn't you being racist. It's just you being careful about not drowning a black person, which I think, in today's America, probably you wouldn't get in trouble for.
Well, what happens is, this happened to us. We took a couple to Cabo. We go out to go swimming with whale sharks. Black guy's too proud to tell us he has never learned how to swim.
Right.
And he jumps in the water and starts drowning.
Yeah.
And we're like, mother. And then.
By the way, good on him for thinking he could pick it up. Do you know what I mean?
With flippers on.
Just on the spot.
We was in a wetsuit, and he thought wetsuits were
will make you better. Yeah, it'll make you buoyant.
And he just sunk.
This will help.
My sound
putting
guy
this
had
heavy
to drop
thing
his
on
gear and jump in after him. No. Oh yeah, it was crazy. You learned you had to ask questions like that because you had to be a little bit. I guess racist is the right word, but what a racist would do is assume things about people, because if you didn't, you could, we took an interracial couple to South Carolina. I
think it'd be racist if you went up to an Asian couple and said, "Can you guys drive?" That's racist.
Right.
I think what you're doing is just acknowledging a a blind spot.
Yeah, exactly. It would be racist.
That would be.
We took an interracial couple that I met in Alaska, and oddly enough, I'd played in a professional snowball tournament with this one guy. He was a baseball player.
Right.
His name was Jamal. And I met them, and they were cool, and I knew him before, and I go, dude, I got to take you on a trip. And he's like, where? Anywhere. I said, where do you want to go? And he was like, I've never been to the lower 48. I was like, are you shitting me? He goes, I've never been to the South. I go, dude, I got a trip in South Carolina. Let's do it. He was like, great. And he was like, because he didn't feel like he had never connected with his African-American roots because he lived in Alaska his whole life.
Right.
And so I was like, dude, we're going to South Carolina. did not put two and two together with the trip we had planned was more based around a white couple probably, because the first thing we did was a Civil War reenactment, and we pull up and I'm like, oh shit, Jamal.
Yeah.
And he's like, what team are we on? I go, we're on the wrong team, brother. and it was uncomfortable.
We're on the wrong team, brother.
And then we get out, we get in our Subaru, and he's like, well, it couldn't get any worse. And I go, oh, it gets worse, buddy.
Yeah, narrator voice. It was about to get worse.
I go, we're spending the night in old slave quarters that were haunted and trying to see if we can get a haunting to happen. And the reason they were haunted is that the man of the house, the owner of the house, killed the slaves for sleeping with his white daughters. And now we're putting an interracial couple in a already haunted house for the reasons it was. But that guy Jamal was cool as shit.
I mean,
he better be. We had shit like that all the fucking time.
I mean, it's almost as if you don't plan and research things; they can go terribly wrong.
Dude, and then stuff would creep up like you didn't even know. Like we had a Jewish director.
Kidnappers plan better than you guys did.
You have. Oh my God! I want to steal that line.
What's yours? I have no other reason to use it. Do you know what I mean?
We had a Jewish director. I never think about this. This would never cross my mind. A Jewish director. I find this great couple, white chick and a Palestinian dude. The Palestinian dude's parents, I guess, got kicked out of Palestine, so he has real hatred towards Jews. And then him and the director start fucking really butting heads on everything. And I'm like, I'm oblivious. I would never think. That's like someone going like, oh, I'm Protestant, I'm Catholic. That would never occur to me that there would be a problem. But man, we're in the middle of Rio and they're about to fist fight. And it just goes racial instantly. And you're just like, holy shit, like where did this come from? And then the couple breaks up. And then I'm sitting in their hotel with them, trying to get them to get back together so we can finish the episode. It was a really interesting show, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where you realize that the world is always at different stages as well. Yeah. Because the Protestant Catholic thing is a good example. 50 years ago, that still was an issue in a whole bunch of places, right? Yeah. Or whatever. That's maybe a little longer. But the point being, and black and white or whatever, this is recent history. And in these places where these people are still at war with each other and this history of dispossession or whatever, feels direct, it's my family that were moved in this situation. Yeah. Then that hatred can still bubble over right on the top of I mean, it's the world. How do you feel about the world? Like, let's just jump into it because it feels to me this last week. I mean, like in the week that we're recording this will go out this week anyway. But I mean, it started with Donald Trump, essentially almost getting into a worldwide nuclear war on Twitter with North Korea. And then obviously, here this week, there was the Charlottesville, white supremacy, Nazi tiki torch marches. I was in Vermont. I was in Burlington, Vermont. Amongst the nice white people. Like
good ones,
the sort of people who are going to light a torch or are about to juggle in a park during a farmer's market. That And so you're watching the news and it feels very foreign to the world that you're walking around in, at that time. But how do you as an American, a person who because I'm an immigrant here and I want America to go well, obviously, but it's not my fight. It's America's fight about their identity and what they want America to be that is happening. And I can only kind of be an observer, a traveler through that, I'd like to talk to you about, just how do you feel about America right now? Is it negative? Is it positive? How do you feel?
Well, I guess you have to start with the fact that I'm a white 44-year-old man. I mean, when the election happened, I was with Doug Stanhope, Bill Burr, and Rogan. We were doing a live podcast at the store, and we just got off stage. We're like, "Fuck, man, what the fuck?" And I don't remember which one. I'm not going to say any of them said it, but one of the four of us said, "Gentlemen, this doesn't really affect us in the slightest. This might be the best thing that ever happened for us because we're white men with money. That's who he's trying to take care of." So I always preface whatever I say about America is I am white. So as a black dude, I would have a very different opinion. But I think what is happening is that people have polarized so much that no one's willing to listen to the other side to find a middle ground. Like, it's either Black Lives Matters or white nationalists. Like, what about guys like me who are like, I think all of you are fucking crazy. Who wants to spend their Saturday protesting? I would never protest. But once again, my life's not super affected. So I might be the problem. Like, in all honesty, I might be the problem.
Well, there's an argument to be made, and I think it's not the first argument that needs to be fixed, but it's certainly one of the arguments that needs to be fixed, which is I'm exactly the same as you. I'm a white rich man. Yeah. Like, literally, it's not bad for me. So even if you're not a white supremacist, you benefit from a system that is set up for white supremacy, right?
And the truth is, like, I don't tweet anything out about the white supremacists, only because I don't. That's not me. I don't tweet out politics. But then I go, maybe I'm the one that should be tweeting out, like, hey guys, this is super unhealthy. Like, but there's a lot of fucking race. Part of me goes, I'm glad they're at least saying it out loud, because I've been in the rooms when they've been saying it quietly,
right? And
I've been around racist people a lot in my life, a lot.
Well, I mean, I think this is also a message that comes out of this: is if anyone thinks this is actually like, oh my God, racism's back.
Yeah.
No, racism never went away, guys.
Never went away.
Racism is one of those things like a pair of blue jeans. Yeah. You just keep them in your cupboard, mate. Blue jeans are always fine. There'll never be a time. There'll be sometimes they need to be a bit skinnier or a little bit baggier or whatever. The whole in them will become fashionable again in a couple of years. Racism's here to stay, guys. It's fine.
It's crazy because I grew up in the South. And so, like, I mean, racism was very tangible when I was a kid. Like, I remember... I've said this on stage. It does not need to get a laugh. It never should get a laugh. But I say this just to remind people how real racism is. The first time I ever heard the N-word, I was 6 years old, and these black kids had come into our neighborhood and stole my football, and then they left. And then they came back into our neighborhood a week later and challenged us, a bunch of white kids. All the kids were older than me. I was the youngest. They challenged us to a game of football with my football. And two brothers, Darren and Derek, I think were their names, said, that's his football. You need to give it back. And they're like, no. And then they started fighting. Someone went and got Darren and Derek's dad. Darren and Derek's dad came next to me and said, what's this about? And I said, they stole my football and they're fighting to get it back. He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, start chanting, boy. Fight, fight, N-word and a white. White don't win, we all jump in. Fight, fight, N-word and a white. I'm 6 years old going, there's a lot on my fucking plate. I go home, I tell my dad what happened. My dad comes down and he's like, don't you ever fucking touch my kid. Don't ever talk to my kid. And he's like, my dad's first of all like, buddy, I'll just get you a new fucking football. Like, don't worry about it. And then we moved out of that neighborhood within a month because it was a really redneck neighborhood. But that, so that was when I was 6. So things didn't change globally by the time I was out of high school.
Right.
And then when I got to college, I went to a school, then the Rodney King shit starts going down. Man, I said to someone, I was saying to Miss Pat, is a black woman who does my podcast every now and then, very funny. She said, when did you stop seeing race? Because as a black person, you're always going to see race. And as a white person growing up in the South, you see race too. I said, when I moved to New York, it's when I stopped seeing race for the very first time in my life. Like, I didn't see it in high school. I didn't see it when I was a child, really. But, like, I definitely witnessed it. And then when I got to New York, I remember going, like, I remember being with Dimitri Martin going, like, wow, so, like, everyone gets on this one bus. Like, everyone gets on a subway. Like, I'd never ridden a bus in Florida. You would never get on public transportation in Florida. And so I was like, whoa, like, this is great. Like, you go into a comedy club, you're like, yo, I'm talking to Puerto Ricans right now. Like, I got 2 gay guys, a Puerto Rican and a black guy that we're all interacting. I was like, that did not happen in Florida State. You only talked to white dudes and white chicks, maybe a couple Cubans, like it was just very globally different.
Oh, I mean, like when I first, saw comedy in New York, I reckon it was like the first time I came over to America, and I was a young comedian at that point. I was over, I might have gone to Just for Laughs, and I reckon we took some days in New York and I just went to some comedy clubs and watched comedy. And I was totally stunned by how many of the acts had bits about the various nationalities. And at the start, I was like, gee, they talk about race and ethnicity a lot in this country. But what I realized was, because I was making a judgment like, people here are much more aware aware of that. And I was like, oh, no. Like, I just performed to like white Australian audiences, and they're performing to this like incredibly diverse group of people. So they have to have a sense of what each of those groups are, and you know what their characteristics are, and how to relate to them.
Like I remember performing in like, meaning like you're talking about people with life experiences that don't connect with your life experiences. So like I remember performing in the Boston Comedy Club for a group of 10 Puerto Rican guys, and talking to them about life and girls the way I had experienced it, thinking I could observationally comedy on my way into their life. And they were laughing so hard at what I was talking about, my experiences with girls. And one of them, I go, you know what I mean? And the guy goes, dude, we have no fucking idea what you mean. And he's like, we're just here. He's going to prison tomorrow. We took him out for a good time. And I was like, oh my God, I've never had to take my friends out for prison. Like, I've never been like, guys, it's tonight before we go to prison. Let's all go take you out. Like, I was like, oh, we have nothing in common. Like, we have almost nothing in common.
Also, here's the thing. Again, like, and I'm going to make a judgment that I often make about people who take their bachelor parties to a comedy night.
Yeah.
There's somewhere else that everybody wants to be.
Yeah.
Comedy is not the first choice. They got the wrong guy to plan the night before prison party. Because while I think of the things that you're going to miss in prison, stand-up isn't one of them. I feel like there's some other things you'd rather do right now. Better get those laughs in just before I go in.
Yeah, New York was insane, and then I moved out to L.A. I always said that the difference in the two different places to do stand-up, it's working out. Like, New York is like working out in the prison yard with a broomstick and cinder blocks. Uh-huh. You're just getting big enough so that you can't get assaulted in the shower. Yeah. Like, that's how stand-up is there, because it is in your face. It is very interactive. And then I came out to L.A., and I had this, like, prison body, like, for stand-up. I remember getting on stage. I was hosting for Drew Carey. And I was getting on stage, and I just came on. I was like, "Where are the Puerto Ricans at?" Like, because I was like, "I need a Puerto Rican so I can start my act. I need a black guy. I need 2 gay guys. I need a bunch of lesbians that are like angry." And I was like, "Oh, I don't have any jokes. I don't have any jokes." And I was like, "Oh, LA is like working out where you look like a fitness model. You're not. You can't defend yourself, but you look good."
Yeah.
And so. So you would see LA comics go to New York and be like, so I was driving down the street the other day, and you just hear black dudes go, "Nah, dude, next." And he was like, I'm not done yet. And he's like, "Nah, you're done, dog." It was, and then you go on the road in the middle of our country, and you're like, the best road comics are guys who can do New York and LA interchangeably, and make it authentic, but have material. Like, make it interactive, but be sure that you're doing material.
Well, so we were having a little conversation before we started the podcast, and so I'm going to continue a thought we were talking about then. But we were talking about the idea, you were asking me about the idea of the value of telling a story to your own audience, the audience, who listen to the podcast, who've come out to see you, who allow you to have that like deeper level of understanding in your story. They get it a bit more versus taking that story to, some club where they don't know you at all and making it work there. I always think the only mistake that people make is where they disrespect their own act. If they say, if I'm going to play the South, or if I'm going to play blah, 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 I need some jokes about this, rather than going, how do I make what it is that I want to say to everybody just work in these different places?
Yeah, Louis C.K. said the art form is making strangers laugh. Right. He goes, that's the art form. And I guess at the time he was not as famous as he was, but someone was asking him, why don't you do the UCB? And he goes, because if I go in there, everyone knows me, and I'm not going to have a hard time. I'd rather go work out at a comedy club where there are people who don't know me. And this was probably 13 years ago when he said this. And so I was like, yeah, because I was doing it the road at the time. I was like, yeah, making strangers laugh. But then you said something that was genius, because I would, and this is what it really blew my mind, because I'm having a hard time with it. Because I go up at the store, like I'll be at the store tonight, and now granted I haven't done the store in a while, but like, some of my bits I feel like are almost too nuanced of, you have to know who I am, like, and I go, does that mean they're not funny? Because I take them on the road and they murder, and I go, okay, and then you were saying, oh no, it's like Lost. Like, you can't just watch season 4, episode 8 of Lost and go, this is a great show. I know everyone loves it. And you're like, and then I was like, yeah, some comics are like Seinfeld. Like, Anthony Jeselnik is like an episode of Friends.
Right.
You don't need to know the backstory.
Right. You can just watch one episode because
news
it's
radio.
Right.
You can watch news radio and laugh your dick off. But like, if you see me, I am not parts of my actor news radio. And I don't think that I like.
But I think, isn't there an element too, though, to kind of extend that point where maybe what it does make you do a little is just find shorter, sharper, establishing ways to set up who you are, or at least the bits of you that they need to know to understand the story on the level that the other, like, so for example, it's like, the thing I always talk about is like, say I meet you at a party, right? First time we meet, we introduce each other fully. We talk about what jobs we have. We talk about, like, do you have a wife? Do we have kids? Like, do you have dogs? Blah, 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 right? But the next time we meet, you don't have to, like, do all that again. You take off from where you left off, right? When you're playing to new audiences, like when you're just doing your own stuff to your own audience, you don't have to reintroduce yourself again every night. Yeah. This is who I am. This is what I'm like. They know that, so you can just tell your story. But I think there's a way of quickly introducing yourself to an audience in a way. Like certainly when I'm on the road, the first 5 minutes, I very clearly talking about a thing about Australia, a thing about like where I grew up, a thing about blah, blah, blah. Just a few things that you need to know about me, a few jokes in that early bit that define me in like, you know, a way that will be necessary for the way that you're going to need to know that I understand the world for the rest of the show. Like, I do think there's a quick way of like shorthanding them straight into where they need to be. Yeah,
I think on my last special, I did that really well. Like, I did a joke about my daughters, and because I had these great jokes about my daughters that worked universally, but I needed to explain that my youngest daughter is a little different. Nothing's wrong with her, but she's just weird.
Right.
And so the joke was, I have two daughters. Georgia's 12, blonde hair, blue eyes, beautiful, real smart, and I got another one. And so like that was the setup. Now when when I start a story about my daughters, I go. I'm assuming everyone knows when I say I love you, we know what's about to happen. But you're right. Sometimes I don't establish, hey, my daughter is weird as fuck.
Right.
Like, and so. Yeah, I don't know. It's been an interesting hour. This hour that I'm working on, I learned a lot doing my last hour, but this one I go. What did you learn? Tell me what you learned. I learned about pacing, because I kind of had a departure from like jokes. My last hour I departed from any joke. I tried not to write any joke that anyone else could write. Meaning, like I really was like bummed when you'd write a joke. Like I remember doing Last Comic Standing, and I had a great joke, a really great joke. I was very proud of it. You know what cops hate? When you touch their faces. But try this when they come to your. By the way, this is a like textbook Dave Attell ripoff, Dane Cook ripoff right here. Okay. That's a Dave Attell setup. Right. And then you know what to do next time they come up to your window and the cop comes and he's like, "Do you know why I pulled you over? Take your lips, put it to his, take your finger, put it to his lips, and go shh, and then take off." You know, so it's like it's not even my voice. I wrote it, but but it's not me. Right. I thought it was so original. I get up on there, and every comic that did Last Comic Standing had a joke about getting pulled over by the cops, and I went, so I'm just one of them. Like I'm not. How am I going to make myself stand out? So then I was doing that for a long time, and then I told the machine story, and I went, and someone said to me, they're like, that's. I mean, no one can do that. No one can take that from you. And I was like, oh yeah. I'm just going to take stuff that's very authentically me and just do that in my thing. So in the last hour, I went, okay, I got this great story about my daughter putting her finger ass and put in the dog's mouth. I'm going to put that. It was murdering. And I was like, but I'm murdering too much. I need to slow down the pacing with some ethos or pathos. I forget which one's which. So I then slowed it down with another story and then did some other stuff and then slowed it down and then did another stuff. So I was like, oh, okay. It can't just be murderous throughout. You've got to tell a story. For me at least, you got to arc and you got to end big. So I learned about how to slow the audience down, to give them a minute to breathe, but not lose them, to keep them engaged. And I'm not doing that on this hour. Right now, I have a really great 30 minutes that's really great. Right. And then nothing else. Okay. Well, like nothing else. I have like 3 other stories, but none of them are connecting with the other. Like that was the other thing, is I was connecting parts of the hour, and so it was all connected. Right. And so now I just have this and then nothing, and like 3 other good stories that are totally detached. But here's the other thing. I was going to say though, like sometimes in those situations, and I'm only speaking from my own personal experience here, obviously, because everybody's very different. But
often what I will find is say I am working on like, you know, and you know, I've got like, I'm working to try to get 60 or 70 together, and like, you know, I've got sort of 40 or 50 that's working, and then I've got another 30 or 40 still that like just, you're just like, I can't get any of this shit to quite, you know, gel in the way that other, you know, bit is. Often I just think, stop trying to make the shit that you can't make work, and just lean in a little harder to the three things that are working.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, you know what, maybe instead of me trying to find a whole new bit, what if I can find another minute or 2 minutes in that story that's already great, that actually not only adds something else to that story, but like gives me another kind of thought or a beat or a, you know, something else within the stuff that already has this system around it that works. So if I take a beat, like if I try a minute or two here and it doesn't work, I can just take it back out again. And the story's like great, you know, but I often think build the stuff that's working and fuck off the stuff that isn't.
What I try to do, my big thing right now is it's a lot, I guess it's a lot. Imagine if you could cut and paste marble. So like I had this joke about this hand job my wife gave me and how bad it was. My wife watched it in San Francisco and she goes, I really think you're past doing hand job jokes.
Right.
And I go, yeah, but it's good. She goes, yeah, but I got this great line in there. And she goes, then great. Get rid of the joke and keep that one line and put it somewhere else.
Right.
And I went, oh yeah, I guess I could do that. She's like, that's what you always do. And I go, it's not what I always do, but I guess I could try it. And so right now, I just want to, the 30 minutes is all about one thing. So I just need other parts of my personality to sprinkle in there. Yeah. And so I don't know. And then I was like, I said to someone,
but that's the great thing about, like, I mean, also the other great thing about, you know, comedy and like looking at comedy, you know, the more you do of it, and like, you know, I've heard you talk to people on your podcast and I've heard you talk on other podcasts. So I think this is probably a philosophy that you share, which is this idea of like, really at the end of the day, it's about being funny. Yeah. Like it's about finding your way to be funny. Yeah. Like we look at it like there's some sort of code or formula or whatever, you know, that you need to have it like this or it needs to work like this. But it doesn't. Like the hand job joke could go two ways. Like you could literally make two very different decisions on the one thing that's not quite working, right? Say you're doing the hand job bit and you're like, this is not quite great. You can do two things. This is the great thing about comedy is like you can exercise it, take the one good line and put it somewhere else. Yeah. That's a totally valid thing to do. Or you can do the other thing of going, right, well, now I'm going to do this bit and then I'm going to do a bit about the conversation I had with my wife about the fact that I was past hand job jokes and like, you know, kind of turn it into this whole thing about like not only the bit, but like, you know, then the conversation you have with her about the bit, which tells you something about, you know, you and her, like the hand job joke probably does, you know what I mean? Like, and then it becomes this other thing that also is kind of symbolic of you having a conversation about whether you're beyond hand job jokes or not. You know what I mean? Like it says something. Like that's the great thing about comedy is you can go such different ways with, you know, those sort of decisions.
One of my favorite things that Louis C.K. did ever was that he put a stamp on comedy and said, hey, it doesn't have to be brilliant. It can just be eat a bag of dicks. Right. And just, if it makes me giggle, I'm going to put it in there. And I was like, oh, that's pretty like, because I got a pretty lowbrow sense of humor. Like, right. I just like being surprised. At the end of the day, I want to be surprised. I want to be in the room and be surprised at what I hear.
Have you ever seen that? Because I know you mentioned Ricky Gervais earlier, and I will say I have a complicated relationship with the work of Ricky Gervais. Like I loved The Office.
I loved it.
Loved most of Extras. Yeah. Did not care for Derek at all.
What was Derek?
That was the one where he pretended to be a kind of like semi-retarded guy. Yeah. Did not enjoy that. Felt like that was not for me. And he's like, I'm not a religious person. Like I'm a person who doesn't believe in God, but like the way that he talks about not believing in God online makes me want to believe in God just to react to, like, you know, it's everything. But all that said, regardless of all that, there's this moment, there's this series he did with Chris Rock and Louis C.K. and Seinfeld. And they're all sitting around talking about comedy. And as a stand-up, because this was at a time where, like, I've done stand-up for longer than Ricky Gervais has, you know.
I think a lot of people have.
Well, that's right. But then he kind of got parachuted into this level of sitting around with, regardless of your taste, three of the greatest comedians of all time, right? And then suddenly you're looking at like, I mean, The Office was great, and you're a great entertainer and comedian and like whatever, but you should not be sitting at this table, you know, like. And you can tell just from the way that he has a bit more like open mic ideas about comedy.
Yeah.
You know, he's just a bit more, because when you first start, you have all these rules and all these things that you think are true. And then what you realize eventually is there's no fucking, I mean, it's just getting it done.
Yeah.
Whatever fucking gets it done and allows you to get it done, that's how you do it, right?
Yeah.
And it changes all the fucking time. And the minute you think you've cracked the formula, you haven't cracked the formula. And, you know, but there's this moment in that where Ricky gets particularly pretentious, and then Louis tells a story about the funniest thing he ever saw was this guy, like this busker, you know, down on the docks, singing, sitting on the dock of the bay, but he changed the lyrics to "sitting on my cock because I'm gay" or whatever. And like, it's just one of those moments where you're like, yes, because sometimes that is...
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the funny bit.
Oh,
you know.
I remember when I first started stand up, I remember finding my voice very quickly. Mm-hmm. And we did this storytelling room, me and this guy DC Benny, and ended up Ben Bailey and DC Benny took it over, but me and DC Benny did a storytelling room. And I went in and I told 5 stories that all made it into my comedy specials in that room, and I found my voice very quickly, but then, like an open micer, I got in my way, because I was like, I'm not doing what everyone else is doing. I need a dick joke. I need a joke about dick jokes. I need a joke about homeless people. I need a joke about taxis. I need a joke about subways. And I was like...
I often believe that, you know, if you go to an open mic night or like an early... because even there's a bit, you know, I found my voice pretty early. I think most people arrive at their first gig with their voice.
Yes.
You know, and then you start to fucking put shit in the way of like, I mean...
Just over fucking the shit out of it. I overthought my stand-up, because what mattered more to me was Patrice or Attell saying like, hey man, that was a good bit. I remember Dave Attell, I had one bit, and Dave Attell came up and he was like, that's funny. The joke was, when I was a kid, I watched a movie called Beat Street about tagging, so I thought that'd be cool. So I went to the gate in front of my neighborhood, the little sign that had Faircloth Estates on it, got a can of spray paint, was like, tsh, tsh, tsh. And then I was like, oh shit, I'm the only Bert in this neighborhood. So then I wrote sucks cock, and Attell came over to me and was like, that's a great bit. And I was like, okay, I gotta write more like that.
Right.
I got more, you know?
Because I got but that's, I mean, the nature of probably the history of comedy a lot of the time has been that. I mean, we're all formed by our environments.
Yeah.
You know?
I think I probably would have been a much better stand-up quicker had I started in a place where I didn't respect the comics. You know?
Yeah,
like if I started in Tampa and I was like, you guys suck, I'm doing my own thing. But instead I started with genius people around me.
And you were like, well, if I want to be a genius, I have to be... The amount of times over the years, like, you know, when you sit down to write something, you know, where I sit down and go, well, what you know, what's so-and-so doing? Should I be doing? And then you're like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, why are you... Like, firstly, that's what they do. Yeah. It's not what you do. Yeah. But secondly, why are you comparing? Like, this is not the fucking Olympics, mate. Yeah. It's like, you're an artist. Like, I mean, the whole point of this is that you get to make what you want to make. Like, and, you know, maybe heaps of people will like it, or maybe some people will like it. I've got a whole bunch of different podcasts. And the thing that, like, really, this is such a fucking bizarre thing to say, but it really, for a while, was problematic to me that they all had very diverse numbers of listeners.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, because there's a part of you that just wants everyone to love everything you do equally, right?
Yes.
But what you've got to kind of come to terms with, and certainly through the podcast process, to bring it back to that, this is one of the lessons it's taught me is, you know, my podcast on this does heaps better than my podcast on this, but I don't differentiate between the two about one being the favorite over the other. I do them because I like doing them all. And sometimes with my stand-up, which should be exactly the same, you're like, oh, no, that's what you're just meant to be doing it, saying whatever, tell whatever story you want to tell, say whatever it is that you have to say. If this was the last time that anybody was ever going to say, see you do what you want to do, what is it that you would want them to be left with?
Yeah.
And then that way you can go, well, I'd like them to think I'm a real fun guy, so this bit will be really fun. I don't want it to all be serious. Or maybe I'd like to, there's a few serious things that I really need to say if this is the last time anyone, try to just funnel that into a fucking entertaining show.
It's an argument for saying that like you look at that and then you go, would I have ever had the balls to be Carrot Top? Like, would I ever have had the balls to be like, I don't give a shit what anyone thinks.
Right.
I'm doing what I want to do, and it's working, and I like it.
It's his thing.
It's his thing.
Like, I mean, that's when you get to that point where you be judgmental of people like that, you're like, oh, no. You just fucking, you know what? And the other thing about being mad at Carrot Top is not taking my gigs.
Not at all.
Like, you know, I can name some people, you know, who are similar to me who you go, okay, well, if I was going to, you know, hate someone or be jealous of somebody, I choose not to. Like, because I often think anyway, to be honest, if Carrot Top gets a whole bunch of gigs, it opens doors for people who are more like Carrot Top. That's the way the industry actually works, right?
Yeah.
Like, no one's ever taken your fucking job. But certainly Carrot Top's not taking anybody's job.
I had someone critical of me the other night. Not the other night, it was a little while ago at the store, because I perform with my shirt off, and this guy was like, are you fucking serious? And I go, it's what I do. I'm comfortable without my shirt on.
Right.
Like, why do you care what I wear on stage? But I didn't say that. I actually went, I know, I'm such a hack. But then I was like, no, I'm not I do it.
Well, firstly, it's not hacky. It's not like there's a whole.
There's no one performs with their shirt off but me.
Yeah, it's not like
Tig,
you.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's not that you can get like 5 other acts together to do the no collar comedy tour.
No collar comedy tour.
You know,
Dude, it is insane. What really frustrates me is when you find someone who steals, because what that is. You know, one of the things that me and you have in common, and Stanhope and Burr and Rogan, and I know I've had this conversation with Stanhope and Rogan, is that there have been and there will be times where we have nothing to say, but we still get on stage and try things that we don't know if they're funny or not. People who steal see that hurdle, get in that foxhole, and they panic. And they go, I can't leave, man. I'm just going to I'm going to do his stuff. And that's one of the things I can't respect people who steal, because I go, you're not allowed to do that. When we go to war, you got to jump out of the foxhole just like I did. You got to get on stage and try something new.
It's interesting what you say, because before, when you were talking about that idea of like telling a story that only you could tell, because in my career, a lot of the stuff that I did, particularly early on, because I had like a TV show that was all about like politics and sort of news, you know, so it was, so a lot of my stuff was about, you know, news items and things that were happening in the world. And as we've seen from Twitter now, and people have a better understanding of it, if Donald Trump does something today, you will see like 100 jokes in a second that are vaguely the same joke. Because if you're using the same source ingredients, you'll have that. And early on, I was like, well, this is really problematic, because eventually, you know, you've got a few things in your set that people are going to be like, well, that sounds a bit familiar to blah, blah, blah. Not because it's like a bit or a... So what I had to decide to do for that very reason is going, if I'm going to talk about an issue, it can't be just... hey, gay marriage is in the news, or hey, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, for example, in my show, I'll give an example so I've got a better explanation of it. I wanted to talk about living in America and what's happened here with the election and those sort of things. But I didn't, like, if you can't just go, hey, remember that thing that Trump said, and tell a joke, because even if I've never seen it, there'll be 300 versions of something on that topic out there in the world, right? So if you're going to talk about Trump, you have to have a personal, legitimate experience and angle on it that could only be your personal, legitimate experience to make sure that you just can't even wade into those waters. Like, So, for example, I tell the story of flying to America, being in the air, literally when he was elected. Like, well, I got on a plane when it was neck and neck, and like we were flying to America with a group of people who never imagined that would happen. So I tell that story, and then within that, I'm able to give you a sense of what I think about that and what my perspective is on that. But you've got to kind of find that unique and personal angle that could be, well, no one else. You know, the jokes in this, no one else could tell, because no one else could be like, well, actually, funnily enough, I was also flying too, you know. And but it tells you something about me. It's the opening part of my show, because I get to explain to you in the thing that I split half my life between these places. Here's my perspective. You know, here's what I'm kind of telling you about myself in relating this personal anecdote, but hopefully that is telling you a whole bunch of other things.
It's funny because you watch a lot of people try to do what Burr does. Like, Burr has got such a great biting sense of humor right now, and you watch a lot of young guys try to emulate him, and I'm like, why? You got to find your own. You got to find your own lane because he does that so fucking well. You're never gonna out-Burr Bill Burr.
Well, the other thing, though, I think that makes Burr work, because and I've said this many times on the podcast before, he's one of my favorite comedians, and I disagree with 90% of what he says.
Yes.
And so he's always a great example to me of the fact that you in no way have to agree with the performer on stage to enjoy them.
Yeah.
And the idea that, like, you know, somehow if I'm going to have an opinion about something or talk about something, that the audience need to agree with me to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like, that's not necessary, firstly.
Yeah.
Secondly, the thing that works about Bill's level of that is that you get a sense that it's just legitimately Bill. I remember seeing Bill like 15 years ago, and he was as mad then about fucking avocado as, you know, he is about shit now. Like, the reason that I can enjoy a lot of the time him talking about ideas and concepts that I personally am confronted by or go, that is not how I view the world at all, Bill, is because you know that that's how he views everything.
Yeah.
Also, you know that he's not like that off stage as a comedian. Like, you know how generous and kind of lovely he is actually as a human being. But on stage, even if you don't know that, it's the fact that it's all that, and it's genuinely, legitimately Bill that works. If you then just go and copy that, it's like the people who saw Bill Hicks and just decided to write jokes about, you know, aliens and whatever. Like, and we all, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I was also a young comedian 22 years ago, guys. So don't, you know.
Dude, it's funny because Burr tackles a subject that he thinks you don't agree with. Patrice used to bring up subjects no one agreed with.
Right.
No, like, he would be, I remember him going one time, he's like, how old do you think what's the perfect age to fuck a kid? And you were just like, and no one was like, and he was like, I mean, God says 13, but like, and you're just sitting there going like, what the I mean, his Elephant in the Room is the best special I've ever seen ever. Right. My favorite special I've ever seen.
Well, he's another great example of somebody who, who's you know, ideas and perspectives, you know, I would like, I mean, but you would always be confronted by, but I mean, he was just dead set funny as well.
Dude, it's so funny is that, like, and I think anyone who knew Patrice would say the same, is that how many people like him versus how many of those people Patrice would have liked.
Right.
He did not like anybody. I mean, we saw a comedian named Ed Byrne.
Yeah, the Irish comedian. Yeah, of course.
We were friends with Ed, but I went to go see Ed in a fucking probably 1,600 seater with Patrice, and we sat there, and he just shit on his act the whole time. And it just, that shit ain't funny. That shit ain't funny. What the fuck are these people laughing at, Bert? What are we doing here? What are we doing? Just shit on his act. And then Ed loved Patrice and wanted to, like, we so excited that Patrice came to see his show, and Ed's like, oh, thanks for coming. And Patrice's like, nah, I wish I could have gotten out of it. But, like, he just did not like anybody. He was the best, man. That was, I genuinely miss him. I didn't go to his funeral because I heard Patrice in my head going, you really going to pay to fly out to see me? You know I wouldn't pay to see you die. I was like, you got to respect the relationship you have with the man, even in death.
Right. Yeah. You're just like, this is what he would have wanted.
Yeah. I would love if he had still been alive for this Trump stuff.
Well, so this is interesting to me because I think there's a real clamoring for, you know, voices. Like, this is a moment where you'd love to see Chris Rock get back to the best of Chris Rock, or we feel like there's a clamoring in the community for Dave Chappelle. I think there's unrealistic pressure sometimes.
You're right. That is the most brilliant statement. It is unrealistic pressure because I don't think that's Chappelle's lane.
Right.
Like, I don't think, as much as I think people want him to be a social commentator, Dave, at his heart, I think, was just a silly guy that liked giggling and getting high and playing video games and listening to music. And now everyone's like, you need to be the voice of the black people. And Chris Rock had that. But, you know, I think people forget Chris doesn't technically write all his material.
Right.
So, like, his first hour was, I mean, that we all loved was like Nick DiPaolo, Rich Voss, Louis C.K. I mean, it was all his best friends helping him craft that hour. So, you know, unlike Bill, who writes all his own stuff by himself, Chris doesn't. So I don't know. I have a hard time compartmentalizing my love for that comic versus like Louis C.K. writes everything himself. Every word that comes out of my mouth, what came from my brain. You know, Dave is the same way. I remember running into Dave in Dayton. He came into the office when I was getting paid. He just walked in. It was like seeing a great white shark in the wild. You're like, oh fuck, I forgot you lived in Ohio. And I was like, how's everything going? He was like, I don't have any material. And as opposed to someone's like, everything's great. I got my team of writers watching my set, and they're gonna help me figure out this hour. Who the fuck? Like, so Chris Rock's not gonna be that voice. I mean, not being a dick, but
no. But or unless he decided that he wanted to be in and hired a whole bunch of people to do that for that reason, like it. But my point of name checking both of those people is, I think you're asking people again, like you said, Chappelle, who I think it's been foisted upon him, and Rock, who it's not, that there was a time where he was that, but he's not really that anymore. He's talking
I don't know,
about
he's got that special coming out.
Yeah,
it may be.
He's talking about, well, he just did Australia, and apparently a lot of it's about his divorce and stuff like that more than other stuff. So.
It's funny. It's funny. Do you think when you establish yourself as a social commentator, like Chris Rock's "Black People versus N-Word" is one of the best bits ever. But like, do you think then people see you as that and don't want to know? Oh yeah, I'm also a man who wants to fuck Solange or whatever.
Well, okay. Again, I didn't see the show, and look, Chris Rock's one of the most successful comedians of all time. So I'm essentially breaking down what I think the problems of his show were based on hearsay from my friends who saw the show. But here's my theory.
Nice. I'm excited.
My theory is that you could do a fucking brilliant thing about the fact that you cheated on your wife with Solange, and the mistakes you made, and what it was like to be this kid who suddenly was like this massive star, and the fact that you were the one who fucked it up. You were the one who got it wrong, and you were the one who cheated, and all those sort of things. And if Louis wanted to do that, or Bill wanted to do that, or a bunch of other people wanted to do that, I would fucking line up around the block and go, great, I'm going to go and see that show. That'll be fucking amazing. But what I feel like he's not doing is that. There's a lot about how much money she got, that she got 51%, like that sort of idea of going, I don't know if that's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear a guy who because here's the thing. 49% of Chris Rock's money is still more money than anybody else in that audience is ever going to earn in their life. Yeah. So the idea that in somehow is relatable, I guess the idea of somebody getting half in the divorce is relatable to people.
Yeah.
But the idea that you're on stage kind of complaining about that fact that she took 51%, you're like, yeah, you got 49% of Chris Rock money. You just sold 2 specials at Netflix for $50 million.
Yeah.
Tell us how you were wrong. Tell me something about you. Yeah. Give me something about how you fucked this up, rather than just, dropping a hint that you fucked someone in Destiny's Child. I feel like there could be great material in there. But I think his men and women stuff has never been my favorite stuff of his anyway. Yeah. I liked his other stuff more. But the reason that all this happened was that you said Patrice, it'd be great to hear what he said. And I think that's what it would have been great times for. It would have been a great times for a new voice. It might have been one of those times where someone like a Patrice, who's so respected within the community, and of course, obviously people knew him from the television and all those sort of things, but a voice like that in these times, you could imagine he wouldn't have got softer. He would have got harder. That's the thing that, and the times would have been suited for him. Do
you ever hear his joke about Michael J. Fox?
I can't remember.
He goes, this is right when Michael J. Fox comes out with MS or whatever he's got.
Lou Gehrig's disease, doesn't it?
No, not Lou Gehrig's.
No, they changed it to Michael J. Fox disease, wouldn't they? Because he's like, what?
He's so much bigger. He's got whatever.
What does he have?
I think he's got, I don't know.
I'm going to Google it.
Anyway, he's got whatever Muhammad Ali has.
Parkinson's?
Parkinson's, yeah.
Parkinson's,
And he comes out and he goes, this is the day Michael J. comes out as having Parkinson's disease. And he goes, man, I saw Michael J. Fox got Parkinson's. He came out on the TV. He's like, yo, we need to raise awareness. We need to raise money. That's just some disingenuous shit. He goes, I would love to be a reporter in that room and go, hey, Michael, what about AIDS and cancer? Aren't those horrible diseases? And he goes, I'd respect the man if he was like, yeah, the problem with AIDS and cancer is I don't got that shit. And then he goes, and then this motherfucker's got the nerve to try to outshake the champ. He's sitting next to Muhammad Ali going, I got it worse than he does. How you can't outshake the champ? By the way, this is the day Michael J. got boxing. I mean, way too soon.
The most beloved star in America has announced that he has heroically announced that not only does he have this disease, but he's going to become a champion for it.
Yeah, and Patrice is shitting on it so hard. Oh, he was, man, he would be a great voice. But I think you're right. I think what we do is we put this responsibility on guys like Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle to be something that, quite honestly, they're probably never wanted to be.
Right.
Like Dave Chappelle, I don't think ever wanted to. I mean, I'm sure he wanted to be famous, but I'm sure there was a version of what he is today when he started. He couldn't be like, I want to be something that no one's ever seen before. A mythical creature that fucking shows up and people lose their minds. He might be the most famous comic ever.
Right. And this thing, but that's the thing, right? Like, you couldn't plan out. Like, people go, I want a Chappelle career. And go, okay, so what, you're going to get a real hot TV show? You're going to walk away from like millions?
Yeah.
You're going to go
you're going to do shit that everyone would say would destroy your career.
You're going to do 3.5-hour shows.
Yeah.
Disappear
that start
in
at 4
o'clock in the morning.
Fuck. Like, that's where it goes. I have a theory that I would love to hear your insights on, because part of me goes, you can't replicate what happened with Chappelle. But then I watched Larry the Cable Guy one night, and it really changed the way I looked at stand-up. And it was like, don't overthink it. Like, just like we were when we were young comics, don't overthink it. I watched Larry, and he has the sleeveless shirt, and he one of his jokes is, I don't know about you, but I think this global warming stuff's horse crap. He goes, I think the Lord picks the temperatures. And the place went fucking nuts. And I went, dumb it down. Like, don't overthink. Don't overthink it. Don't, just be what they want you to be. Like, and then I tried it one night. I go, I don't know about you guys, but I like getting drunk by myself. And they go fucking nuts. And I'm like, I could do this all night.
Yeah.
Just, hey guys, who wants another drink? Shirts off. And then I think sometimes, and I think that's what's beautiful about Chappelle, is that he doesn't overthink it. He just does exactly what his brain tells him to do, and he does it. And then you look at guys that you go, oh, they're definitely overthinking it.
Right.
Like, oh, it's what is it called? Paralysis by overanalysis?
Yeah.
Like, you look at some guy's career and you're like, you shouldn't have thought about it at all.
Well, the problem is, though, here's the thing. I'm from a dairy farm. So my parents are dairy farmers.
Really?
Their parents were farmers, and my brother is a farmer. My dad lives on the road that he was born on. He's never moved anywhere off that road. 250 people in the entire area where I grew up for the first 17 years of my life. So,
really?
Yeah. So I'd never met anybody in show business. Never met a stand-up comedian. I'd heard a couple of Billy Connolly albums and a couple of Bill Cosby albums. And, when I first started doing stand-up, I'd seen a few galas on the TV and those sort of things. But really, I didn't have much of a sense even of what stand-up is. So along the way, you have to just... I always say to people, when I started, it was still running away to join the circus. Because we're kind of a generation, maybe half a generation behind where it is now. But no one...
There was no frame of reference for what a comic was. When I told my dad I wanted to be a comedian, he was like, buddy, I don't know what to tell you. He was like, what do you do? I go, I think I'm going to move to New York. I mean, there was no internet to show you what a comic was.
Right.
You
couldn't listen to a bunch of podcasts and go, that the idea of dying or, getting something wrong or having, a thought that somebody else has had and how you deal with that, or all these sort of things that we're talking about. You can now just sit and listen to a podcast and go, everybody's had that exact same thing happen to them.
Yeah.
It turns out that I'm not the worst person ever in comedy.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. There was no frame of reference. I didn't know. I remember going, I was from the generation where I went to a comedy club once and you had to go ask the comic, hey, how do I become a comedian?
Right.
As opposed to now, everyone knows, I just go to an open mic. I didn't know there was an open mic. I didn't know anything about that. It's so funny. All I could think about is when you said that you started listening to Bill Cosby albums. I wonder, because a comic always writes about what is authentically going on in their life. I wonder if you could peruse his albums and find anything about drugging and raping chicks.
Well, there is apparently.
Really?
So, yeah. I mean, firstly, all the titles of the albums now because I was actually cleaning out some stuff at home and found a whole bunch. And they all have names that have not aged well in light of the allegations against
Shut
him.
up.
Oh, they've all just, there's a
Sleepy
whole...
pill.
Yeah, there's a whole, like literally, like every one of them reads bad now.
Snoring blowjob.
Yeah, even just the best of Bill Cosby. You're like, no. None of them have aged well, Bill.
Yeah.
But there's some people who've gone through, and there's actually, and in fact, there's one story that is essentially about drugging somebody.
We know that was super common in the 70s. Like,
Right.
yeah, there was when that Bill Cosby thing came out, there were a couple people that I think they've probably scrubbed the internet. But like, even Hugh Hefner was like, some girl was like, no, when I met Hugh Hefner, he gave me a Quaalude to loosen up. And he's like, oh, yeah, we call them panty droppers.
Oh, I mean, there's stories around. You don't want to dig too deep into, that scene that was around David Bowie and Mick Jagger and all that sort of the parties they were going to and all those sort of things. A lot of that stuff's. I mean, and again, a lot of it wasn't as. I mean, fuck, who knows? It was different times. Who fucking knows? Like what ifs. But it. I don't know. Why were we talking about that?
We're talking about because you were talking about getting into stand up and was kind of like joining the circus.
Oh yeah. No. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Lost my train of thought. Anyway, we should finish up.
How long are we gone?
Well, it's an hour and 20, and you've got other shit to do
No,
today.
I don't have to do shit.
No, you have to.
At 4 o'clock. I think
Oh,
I
at
got
4.
out. Yeah.
So we got
I can
a little
definitely
time?
keep talking. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
this is one of the best conversations I've ever had.
Well, let's have a pause then, and then
Okay.
I'm going to go to the bathroom. We'll come back.
Yeah, cool.
All right, we're back. We had a little break, but we're back. I was going to get a drink, but I forgot to get a drink. But it's okay. I got enough there. I can get through to the end of the podcast.
I won't keep you too much longer.
You're not keeping me at all. In fact, I'm happy to continue talking. But I was just cognizant of the fact that it was also Monday morning, and you had spoken to me about the fact that you have quite a busy week, and
my week's
and also we'd fucking just got some gold out already. So I thought people had, if nothing else, they'd already got their free podcast worth of entertainment.
Oh yeah,
my fans. This is just bonus now.
I started looking at what makes my podcast good, like where my numbers were. So like I told you, I did that 5-hour podcast.
Yep.
And it was doubled my numbers. My numbers doubled for that. And I was like, that's odd. And then I found out when I drank, my numbers jumped.
Right.
So if I drink and I do a long one, people lose their minds.
Yeah, I mean that's not great for your future health.
Yeah.
But if you have to,
I'm gonna be drinking anyway.
If you have to tie yourself to that business model, you're like, Have you seen Bert? He's actually been doing a podcast since May. Literally, just he's drinking constantly. Hasn't been asleep yet.
It's funny because I don't drink on stage technically.
Right.
Like
technically, what does that mean? When somebody, you bring a drink on.
I bring a drink on. If someone sends a shot, I don't turn it down.
Right.
But I don't get drunk on stage.
Uh-huh.
Like I did 3 shows Saturday in Houston, and I drank 1 Tito's and soda on the late show at 11:30. That's it. But everyone thinks I'm fucking hammered. Like everyone thinks. So it's like a great business model for me because I do like to get hammered. So when I do get hammered, no one blames me. But I don't perform hammered. So I will go in and do press and drink at press because I go, I don't want to be here. Like it's 6 in the morning.
Right.
I'm hungover, and then they're like, "You want a drink?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." So then sometimes I go on TV drunk, and people are like, "Did you see him?" But anyone who's a fan's like, "I fucking loved it."
When we taped, not my last special, but the special before, it was at the Sydney Opera House, and it was the first time that I'd ever. I think maybe it was the first time I'd ever played the main room at the Opera House. And
how big is that?
2,500 maybe.
Holy
shit! It's a decent room, and but it's also the main room at the Sydney Opera House. It's the concert hall at the Sydney Opera House. It's it's in prestige. It's not the biggest venue. It's not even probably the best venue to play, but it's in prestige wise. It's like it's a big deal. And so we were taping 2 shows that night for the special, right? And the idea is like the first one was packed full, the second one was pretty much full, but like the idea was you do the first show. You get that, and then just anything you didn't get right in the first show, you've got the second show to make sure that you get that right or whatever. That's the model. So I do the first show, but what I've done on this night is I've forgotten, because it's like a night and we're taping it, and I've got to get makeup and hair and blah blah blah. When I did the first show was technically very competent. I hit all the jokes, and if we only taped 1 show, then you would have used the first show and you would have been happy with how the special went. But because I had it in the can, what I then did was like, fuck it. All right, I'm going to have some beers. We may have gone outside, come back inside. And then I just loved the second show because it felt like what it is actually like. If you came to see me do a night of stand-up comedy, that's what it's going to look like more than the first one, which was more technically proficient. Like there's a whole improv bit in the special, like because it was second show and I just like found myself in a weird hole in a bit I'd done like 1,000 times, but that night it just came out different. And I like, and it's in the special. I've never told that joke that way any other time, but it's the recorded version that people will go, oh, well, I guess that was the version of the joke. It's not at all. Yeah. But I just loved that show. And I didn't think I looked too fucked up. Like we released it. It's essentially the whole show is just that second show. Like, we barely, I think, used anything at all from the first show in the show. My hair's a little floppier. In the first show it's all neat and in place. In the second show it kind of flops out. And I'm definitely looser, but I was like, I don't know, people won't think I'm fucked up. And then every now and again, I just get a message from someone online going, how fucked up were you during that show? And I'm like, because in my head, I'm like, no, I'm fine. No one can tell. And then occasionally someone can tell. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
When I was young, we did this thing called Premium Blend. And there was a comic there who was like, I need a beer. By the way, I probably... The very first time I ever did stand-up, I was about to have a drink. And this guy, Christian Harloff, said to me, this is in Tallahassee. And I went to get a beer, and he goes, hey, man, nothing for nothing. That's a really bad habit to start right now. And he goes, because if you need that to get on tonight, you'll always need it. So do it sober and see if you like it. So I did it totally sober. and then I would have beers sometimes, but not really wasn't something I needed. But then we did this taping, and I watched this comic, and they wouldn't allow him to have a drink on stage. And he didn't know what to do with his hand.
Right.
Because he'd always had a beer in his hand. I was like, oh shit. And he was so uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, I'm never going to let that happen. And so I've always tried to work, like I'll bring a drink on stage with me, but very seldomly do I touch it. But on the late shows, when I start telling the machine story, I go, all right, I'm going to murder this drink and get through this story.
I was just doing Just for Laughs in Montreal. And one of the things that, my set at the gala, I just did too fast. It's a mistake that I can sometimes make when I'm just not quite on it or like that or whatever, is like I can speed up and really the trick is to slow down.
Yeah.
But what I realized was part of it was environmental because my classic slow down move is to just lean back to that stool because I always have the stool literally just basically right next to me and I will have a drink there, right?
Yeah.
And I can just either lean on the stool or just like touch my drink or just like go to grab my drink or have a drink or whatever. And that'll slow me. But when I was out there and I was already at this pace that I shouldn't have been at, I was just a little bit, bigger than I needed to be. I had nothing. I had no brakes. Like, I just couldn't find a mechanism, like a different physical thing where I could just go, this steps me out of it and gives me a little break, which going and getting a drink or having a sip or like doing whatever, it can just break and you can reset a little.
Oh, that's what we had to talk about touring. And about my special. I'm shooting a special in February. And my agents were like, hey, because I'm doing it at the Trocadero, they're like, you probably should do some similar rooms.
Right.
Because there is a pacing, like when you go into a theater and it's just pitch black, you're like, oh, now I'm just monologuing. Like, I'm not really connecting with anyone. I'm just monologuing. You're like, oh, yeah, I should probably do some of those. So I don't
Get
know.
the rhythm. Like, I mean, well, that's the hard thing to do about doing a big show. Like if you do the Opera House, it's hard to say, hey, can I come and do 4 nights at the Opera House before I do?
Is there a similar room like this in Des Moines?
Yeah, you guys, Is there, yeah. Can I play the Wagga Wagga Opera House?
Yeah. No, I love clubs. I did my last special in a club, and I was going to do this one in a club, but
yeah, I think the next one I do, I might go back and do a club show. Yeah. I quite like the idea of doing some big ones for a while, but I feel like I wouldn't mind shooting a little, because I actually think when you watch them, like a club show feels, you can actually get more into the rhythm. Because the thing about watching stand-up on DVD or whatever, because a lot of people do it these days, so you just got to acknowledge that they do, is that you're very disconnected from the experience that the audience is having there in the room.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in the really big shows, you just get completely disconnected. Whereas in the smaller shows, the club shows, like a lot of Stanhope stuff, for example, his stuff's always filmed, pretty much in like small venues. And you can actually sort of get in the rhythm of going, I can almost feel like I'm here. I could almost be leaning at the bar at the back of this show,
Yeah, I feel like that too. But, the buyers, that's part of the reason I'm doing Australia is that you want to show the buyer, I can play to an international market so that they go, we can, but then they go, because what their parameters are, they're like big theaters. I want to show that we have stars here. And part of me is like, no, like my favorite Louis special is the one he did at the store. Like it was just intimate. I love that shit. But
yeah, no, I mean, there's a difference, obviously, and because this is the funny thing about it. We started talking before about that idea of like just pursuing what it is that you artistically want to do. But of course, you are also in like show business, and like half of that word is business. And so there is a part of it that you're like, well, I'd like to be able to do whatever the fuck I like to do.
There's
but
so
also
many
I need to
fucking mirrors to this business. Like we're talking about, like right now I'm doing clubs. I'm doing 450 seaters in most 400 seater clubs, selling out 6 shows a weekend and making really good money. And they're like, in order to take a step forward, you need to take 2 steps back. You need to do 1,000 seaters, like club theaters. You're going to make a quarter of the money, but it'll look good to everyone in the industry. And then we can sell your story. I'm like, fuck that. The story is I'd rather make X amount of dollars at a club and walk away and buy a fucking pool and pay cash for it than do a theater. Like, who are we doing this for? Like, no other business do you take a step back to like no relation. They're like, so I know this relationship's going really good, but we're going to start doing threesomes. Trust me, it'll be better for us in the long run. You're like, no, it's not.
Well, the most successful season of shows, like profitable season of shows I've ever done in my entire life. And this is just a great example of what you're talking about, because I've been lucky enough at home. I have Melbourne Comedy Festival, play 21, 22 shows in a, 1,000 seat theatre. Like, a lot of people come and see shows, right?
Yeah.
But you also have to hire a 1,000 seat theatre and all the people that come with a 1,000 seat theatre.
And by the way, it's the exact same amount of people you have to hire in a 1,000 seat theater than you do for a 6,000 seat theater. Right. There's no difference in what it costs to operate a theater at 1,000 versus operating a theater at 6,000. The goal is to put you in a 6,000 seater where you're walking with 150 grand. But in order to walk with 150 grand, you got to walk with 10 when you can make 50.
So, best thing I ever did, and the most enjoyable run of shows I ever did, most profitable I ever did. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because it's so nonsensical that I've never done it again. It's an exact example of what you're talking about, which is the idea of like, for some reason when I film the special or, you do these sort of things, you go, I'm going to do it at the Sydney Opera House. I see none of that money. Yeah. By the time we film the fucking special and we pay the fucking Opera House and blah, 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 you're like, I did all this work and like thousands of people came and everyone got paid but me.
Yeah.
Like
I'm the last one to get paid from this. How's this even possible?
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But I did this run of shows at the Sydney Comedy Store. I was in Sydney and I was, they have their regular show at 8:30.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, can I just come down and do my show at 7? They don't normally have anything on at 7. I was like, I just want to come down and do the show at 7. I'll be done by like 8:05. You can roll in your other crowd. And back then, they were also at a point in their evolution where I was like, and you know what? If people are having a good night, I'll just tell them to stick around. And there was a few nights early on, particularly in the midweeks, where for them, having like another 40 or 50 people who might roll into the actual main show of the night was like cool for them as well.
Yeah.
So I ended up I think I was going to do 4 weeks at the start. And I was thinking I was doing like Tuesday through Saturday or whatever I was doing. But it just kept selling. Yeah. Because all I had to sell every night was 280 tickets. So you're not really and it would just, we weren't advertising it. I was doing a bit of radio or whatever, but it just would sell because people would come along and have a good time.
Yeah.
And they would tell other people to come. And so we just kept doing it. And I ended up doing 10 weeks or something ridiculous of this show. But it was the best job of all time because I would get up, in the day, I'd do whatever else I had to achieve. I'd go down there at 7. I'd be done at 8:05. I'd be home at 8:25.
Oh my God.
But it was like a day job.
Yeah.
It was like being able to do my show. I guess it was like the equivalent of if you're on Broadway or if you're on blah, 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 where you could just go, or Vegas.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, well, this is my job. Every night at this time of the night, I do my show, but other than that, I can just get on with my life. Dude, and it was the best.
I'm doing,
I should do it again.
Denver. I'm doing Denver in a couple weeks. And look, I don't know how it went down. I'll just tell you from what I heard, they were like, she doesn't think you can sell a weekend. And I was like, in my head, I was like, I can definitely sell a weekend, but whatever, that's fine. Just give me an off night. And they're like, she'll give you a Sunday night. So Sunday night sold out in like 30 minutes. And they're like, hey, you want to do another Sunday show? I go, yeah. So we had another Sunday show. That sells out. They're like, you want to do a Monday show? I go, yeah. They go, hey, you want to do another Monday show? I go, yeah. And they're like, hey, do you want to do Tuesday? And in my head, I go, yeah, just book me Tuesday and Wednesday, and then I'll stick around for Stanhope on Thursday, and then see what she's got the next weekend. I'll do Friday, Saturday, Sunday if she wants to. And it's the best money I'll ever make, and it's the most fun I'll have, because it's just Monday, just walking down to the club doing a show.
Right.
Oh, it's the fucking best.
And in Denver.
Yeah, and in Denver. Oh, I can't fucking wait. But like these, like the shows that stress me out are these like 3-show shit.
That's all right. No worries. It's the beauty of podcasting.
It's these shows on Saturday, when you do 3 shows on Saturday, those stress me out because I'm like, fuck.
Right.
Like I would love to find a place where I could just do 1 hour every single night.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, that's the secret. So that was the great joy of these shows, was it's just the hour. It's not doubles on Fridays or Saturdays or triples or whatever it is that takes all the joy out of it. It's just doing your show every night.
That takes all the fucking joy out of it. My Thursdays are my favorite shows ever because I go in and it's just one show. I usually do like an hour 40, just one show. And I'm like, I'm fucking around. I'm writing on stage. I'm taking old stories and doing like best ofs for people. Because like a lot of times with storytellers, people want to hear stories they've heard before.
Right.
You know, they're like, and so I don't mind that. If it's a Thursday show and I don't have a second show, I'll tell them. But yeah, I love a one show. I want to do that. I want to just move. Like, what the fuck am I doing in LA? I should just move to a town. I would love a residency in Vegas.
Right.
I would love a residency in Vegas. Ralphie May, you know Ralphie May?
Yep.
Ralphie May got offered a residency in Vegas. He's like, I don't know if I should take it. And I go, are you kidding me? You're in Vegas. You could get a trainer. You could live a life and then just go to stand up at night.
Right.
Once a night.
Once a night.
Yeah.
At the same place.
At the same place.
Essentially, you just have a job that goes for an hour.
Oh, you walk in, you're like, and they know what you want. You're like, salmon, broccoli.
Right.
And they got it ready for you. That's where you eat your dinner. They got a double Tito's and soda waiting for you at the end of the show. You can have your own weed. You don't have to travel with it. You just take a bong hit when you're done. I'm fucking into a residency.
All right. Well, let's hope you get one out of this podcast.
Please.
Big Vegas listenership, I imagine. Yeah. So can I ask you this? Tell us about, this podcast also is listened to by a whole bunch of American people. So anything you want to plug, but particularly let's talk about the fact that you're coming down to Australia.
Oh, yeah.
So September, do you know your dates, or where do they find them? Where's the best place for them to go to find information about you?
I think you can go to bertbertbert.com, but I'll tell you right now. Perth, I'm in Singapore the 9th. Perth the 11th, Sydney the 13th,
okay,
Melbourne the 14th.
Do you have the venues there? Are you able? No.
I actually do. Okay. I can tell you
Tell me where you are.
By the way, I'll tell
places.
you where I am, and I'll tell you how many tickets I've sold.
Okay, this will be good. And then we can see the bump when the podcast comes out. We can do a very accurate bump of people coming out to see the show.
All right,
here we go.
Here we go. These are the tickets I've sold. I'm at the Soda Theater in Singapore.
Okay.
It seats 600.
How are you going?
I've sold 158.
I reckon. You know what I've heard about Singapore? Late buyers. That's good. I reckon that's good. Late buyers.
20. If you're curious, that's 26% of the.
Actually, I don't think that's too bad. Actually, still a month away, right? That's okay. I think Singapore's looking all right to me. I feel good about it.
Yeah. Octagon Theater in Perth is seats 680. I'm at 580. That's going to sell out.
That is also going to be a really, really fun show.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
That is one of my favorite venues in Australia to perform at, the Octagon Theatre.
Yeah.
It's at a university. It genuinely is kind of an octagon shaped thing. Like the audience are in it, but it's just. You're going to have a really good time there. Get tickets to that. There's only a few left to that one, so get tickets.
Perth is going to sell out. Sydney I'm at the Emmore.
Oh, beautiful! Hey, here we go. Yeah. Beautiful. It's a beautiful theater.
1,500. We're at 800, so it's over half sold, but that'll probably sell.
I reckon that's going to sell out as well.
Yeah, Sydney.
Oh man, sold out at Emmore. That's the Rolling Stones played at the Emmore. This is like
really.
Yeah, this is like you'll look at the posters on the wall. I've seen a heap of the best gigs I've ever seen in my life at the Emmore. That'll be great. You'll love that.
That's over half sold. So that usually I can tell if I can get to half a month out. Usually it picks up. Melbourne, I'm at the Comedy Theatre.
Oh,
seats
so this is where that's what does it say? Tell me.
Seats 9 $9.50.
Right. Okay. $9.50. So that's the one I play during the comedy festival, the comedy theater. You'll like that too. That's a real fun theater.
That's a $7.20. That'll sell out, I think.
Yeah.
And then
that
Brisbane,
will.
we're in the Tivoli. That seats $6.50. We're at the $5.80. So that's going to sell out too.
Yeah.
But
all right.
Sydney's the big push. That'd be cool. I've never performed by myself for 1,500. The only meaning I booked them.
Right.
The most I ever did was the Wilbur seats 12, and we a month out we were at 50%, and it sold out, and that was one of the most amazing shows I ever had.
Well, I'm gonna say I've got a pretty good feeling about this. I feel like that Sydney Enmore show, and again, if you're in Sydney, go out and see it, because I reckon that may well be the big one for you. I reckon you're going to get over those numbers. So, that'll be exciting, right?
I would really love that. That'd be
a fun show to be at as well. Just I think it's fun to be at those shows for comedians as well.
Yeah.
If you're at something where for them it's a bit of a
big deal,
fun and special
we bring
big deal night.
I made a big mistake in Boston at the Wilbur. I'd never performed in anything that big that I had sold tickets to, meaning me. And I was like, I got to see what it's like to look from the top. I want to,
Right.
So I got up in the top of the club, and I was like, maybe I'll grab a beer, up here and bring it on stage. And I go, and I didn't realize there's 1,200 people that want to see me. So as soon as I show up, everyone fucking loses their shit.
Right.
Oh, what the fuck are you doing up here? And then I was like, and I ruined the poor guy on stage. There was a huge, because I didn't realize that they're there to see me. It's like so often you're so used to just people being in the club, and you can walk through.
You can do your bit and then just sneak up the back and have it.
Yeah, and so that was crazy. That Enmore will be a big deal for me.
Well, it's a very exciting venue, and they're a brilliant crew there at the Enmore too. They'll look after you. You'll have a genuinely good time with that. Well, mate, you said normally when you do one show in a night, it goes for an hour and 40, and we've pretty much got to an hour and 40, so I think that's pretty good timing.
This has been a blast. When are you going to do my podcast?
Well, it's called the Bertcast, right? And people can find that in the places that they find podcasts.
Yeah.
But we'll do that for sure.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Have some Fosters. That's a big... what's the beer you guys have in Australia?
Well, the fun thing is that in Australia we don't have Fosters. It's an imported beer. It's a beer that we sell to the world, but that no one in Australia drinks.
What's the one you guys drink that I had?
All sorts of different ones in Australia.
Where
you're in Sydney, so maybe, I don't know, Tui's, Cooper's? No.
I can't remember.
Don't know. It would depend.
You gotta have you on my podcast.
But yes, I was going to say about the Fosters though that Garrett. Do you know Gareth Reynolds? Do you know who Gareth is? So the other night he came over to do the podcast, and he brought me as a joke like a giant can of Fosters. And then the other night when I had run out of beer, and I was looking at it going, yeah, all right. I'm going to drink a giant can of Fosters.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm an Australian overseas. I can do this. And I got to be honest with you, I quite enjoyed it.
And then you went on your balcony to have a cigarette, and there's a black guy next to you, and he's drinking a thing of Old E, and you guys look at each other, and you're like, turns out we like what we like.
You know what? Sometimes stereotypes are stereotypes, Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on, mate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will.